persecuted church. Foundation of the Nestorian Church under the Parthians 50 to 225 AD. Timothy I, the patriarch, or Timothy I, the patriarch of the Nestorians, who wrote at the end of the 8th century, states that the Magi had introduced the Christian religion among them by proclaiming the message of the gospel throughout the Persian Empire, and after the return from that holy pilgrimage, and that Christianity was established among them about 20 years after the ascension of our Lord. As about 80 AD, the missionaries' activity among the flourishing Jewish community at Babylon is well known from the Jerusalem Talmud, where it stated that the Kanani of Capernaum was sent by his uncle Joshua to Babylon to counteract their influence. Probably the Christian movement in these regions was started by the Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and the dwellers in Mesopotamia who were in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost and saw that great miracle mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles. And that would be, according to this footnote, in Sami chapter 4, page 7, referring to Acts 2, verse 9. It has commonly been held by the Assyrian Christians that St. Peter wrote his first epistle from the real and not from the figurative Babylon. See 1 Peter 5:13. Edessa, the starting point. It is believed by the Assyrian Christians that Christianity was planted in Edessa in the 1st century by Adai or Thaddeus, who is variously considered as either the Apostle Thaddeus or one of the 70 who had been commissioned to go there in response to a letter from King Agbar to our Lord, to Jesus the Christ. This legend, as contained in a book called The Doctrine of Adai, is as follows. Agbar Ukama, or Agbar the Black, he was actually a black man, one of the kings of the native dynasty who died in 50 AD, sent an embassy to Sabinus, the deputy of the Emperor Tiberius in Palestine. The embassy consisted of the nobles MarYah and Shamshagram, with a scribe called Hanan. On their way home they stayed in Jerusalem in 10 days, where they saw and heard Jesus. Hanan wrote down everything which he saw that Jesus did. So they returned to King Agbar. When Agbar heard, he wished to go himself to Palestine, but was afraid to pass through the Roman dominions. He therefore sent a letter to Jesus by Hanan the scribe. Via him, Agbar Ukama, a mayor of the country, obviously the king of the country, to Jesus, the good deliverer, who has appeared in Jerusalem. Peace. I have heard of thee and of the cures wrought by thy hands without any medicine or herbs, for it is reported that thou makest the blind to see, the lame to walk, thou cleanest the lepers, castest out unclean spirits and demons, thou healest those who are tormented with chronic diseases, and raisest the dead. And when I heard those things about thee, I settled in my mind one of the two things. Either thou art God, come down from heaven, or the Son of God. I request of thee that thou wouldst trouble thyself to come to me and cure the disease which I have. I have also heard that the Jews murmur against thee and wish to do thee harm. But I have a city, small and beautiful, which is enough for both of us. When Jesus received the letter, he replied to Hanan the scribe, Go and say to thy Lord that sent thee unto me, Blessed art thou that believest in me, that thou hast not seen me, for it is written of me that they which see me will not believe in me, and they which see me not, they will believe and be saved. Now, touching what thou hast written to me, that I should come unto thee, it is meet that I shall fulfill that for which my Father that sent me, and when I shall have gone up unto him, I will send thee one of my disciples, that whatever disease thou hast he may heal, and all that are with thee he shall bring to life eternal, and thy town shall be blessed. This famous letter of Christ to Agbar seems to have been translated very early into Greek and incorporated by Eusebius in his ecclesiastical history. It is contained in some fragments of Greek papyrus owned by the Bodleian, dating from 4th or 5th century. In 1901, a lintel was discovered at Ephesus with the letter of Agbar to Christ and that of Christ to Agbar inscribed on it in the characters almost contemporary with Eusebius himself, 4th century. Providence in the story of Agbar both shows the need and fills the desire, like the master musician who presses the two keys on a piano as he chooses and makes them respond in accord. After the ascension, Aheyeh, the apostle Thaddeus, came to Edessa, healed Agbar and Christianized him and his people. That's according to Assamani 4, paragraph 9 to 15. Thus, Edessa is the traditional starting point and the centre of the early Christian life and literature. So that letter above proves that this Christ existed. Thus, Edessa is the traditional starting point at the centre of the early Christian life and literature. From the end of the 2nd century on, it was the centre of very active missions and a nursing mother to the national churches of Persia and Armenia. Edessa was the capital of a small kingdom east of the Euphrates, the district of Oshoin or Orhoin, from which comes the modern name Aheyeh or Urfa for the town, which in the Bible is known as Ur of the Chaldees. It had belonged to the Seleucid kings of Antioch, but as that region was divided between the Romans and Parthians, and Edessa lay on the frontier, its history followed the usual fortunes of a border state. Until the end of the 2nd century of our era, Edessa was within the Parthian suzerainty. I guess they were under their rule. In the August of 116, however, it was stormed and sacked by the Roman general Lucius Quietus, and in 216, or 10 years before the fall of the Parthian monarchy, the Romans took possession of Edessa and it became their colony. Mission of MarYah. The ancient traditions of the Assyrian Christians declare that MarYah, the disciple of Aheyeh or Thaddeus, was sent by his fellow workers at Edessa to Seleucia as a missionary. He wrote back to them, "This land is like the soil full of thorns and thistles, a land of hills and mountains. Its inhabitants are worthless heathens. I am not able to do any good. Now, if you say so, I shall return you or go elsewhere." His fellow Christians, being very anxious for the salvation of Seleucia, wrote to him thus: "Thou art not allowed to leave the field, but thou shalt have to climb those hills and mountains, and till and sow them, that they bring fruit for an offering unto the Lord." So he did, and his efforts were crowned with success. He worked also in Adiabene in the Aramaean province, but chiefly in Kyrgyzstan. The most fertile fields for the seed of the kingdom had been those previously the most barren of good, or desperately fruitful of evil. The tenacity with which men cling to error is a pledge of their tenacity to Christianity when converted. The more fanatic non-Christian people become more enthusiastic Christians. Natural impossibilities can never be pleaded in view of the commission, "Go ye into the world." Nobius the African, who wrote in the 3rd century, mentions the Ceres as among the Oriental nations who had embraced Christianity, and Mosheim regarded these as Chinese. The church among the pagans advanced rapidly. The old faiths were outgrown. The very force which developed them provided for their decay. Hence it was that they turned so readily to the new light of Christianity and embraced it with startling reading this. Okay, so it sounds like they turned to the historians. The church under the Assyrian kings, they faced some moments of good, and then probably persecution. Christianity at this time was widely spread and well organised in Persia. On that ground, the Assyrian rulers had to recognise its legal rights to be tolerated, providing that the missionaries' activities should be confined to their own people, and that any conversion from Zoroastrianism to Christianity should be punishable with death. But as it is not in the nature of Christianity to be restricted and limited, here also it could win converts from the strongest and the most prominent Zoroastrians, who became churchmen of the most saintly character. The fertile soil of Persia that had raised vigorous weeds now grew robust Christians. Even the marred and hostile elements were made tributary to the final triumph of Christianity. The worst people without Christ became best with him. Maybe they went through some persecutions because of that. As long as the Roman Empire was pagan, the Persian church was tolerated, but with the Christianization of the emperor himself and his empire, things would change. Christians in Persia were looked upon by the Zoroastrians as political suspects, and as sympathizers with their co-religionists in Rome. The suspicion became their death warrant. Thus, when Ashur returned from the war with Rome, saw it as humiliating defeat, he turned furiously upon Christians, declaring, "At least we will make these Roman sympathizers pay." A firman was issued requiring the Christians to pay exorbitant taxes as a contribution to the cost of a war which they were taking no part. The Mar Shamun Bar Sabai Catholicos being ordered to collect the same. He refused to obey the order on the double ground that his people were poor and that tax collecting was no part of a bishop's business. On this, it was easy to raise the cry, "He is a traitor and wishes to rebel." A second firman was issued ordering the arrest and death of the clergy and the general destruction of all the Christian churches. Finally, another firman was given, commanding that all Christians should be imprisoned and executed. The persecution lasted 40 years, during which period men of all ranks suffered martyrdom, among them officers of the king who embraced Christianity. The firman contained the following accusations: the Christians teach men to serve only one God and not to honour the sun or fire, to defile water by their ablutions, to refrain from marriage and procreation of children, and to refuse to go to war with the king. They have no scruple about the slaughter and eating of their animals. They bury their dead in the earth and attribute the origin of the light and darkness and of snakes and creeping things to a good God. Ashur offered freedom both for Mar Shamun and his people if he would consent to adore the sun, but once, on his own refusal, the order of execution was given. The flock of Bar Sabai, five bishops and about 100 clergy were gathered together to hear his last words and to receive his solemn blessing. May the cross of our Lord be the protection of the people of Jesus. The peace of God be with the servants of God, and establish your hearts in the faith of Christ in tribulation and in ease, in life and in death, now and forevermore. They sealed their testimony on the morning of Good Friday, 339 AD. The scene took place outside Kaka of Lapat or Susa, where the persecutions in this case began, but it soon spread into most of the Christian centres of the kingdom. So they probably were martyred. At times they were refused burial of their dead. The martyrs stood fast in the face of death and refused to take their view of life from its immediate circumstances. Anaxarchus, crying out while being beaten to death, beat on at the case of Anaxarchus. No stroke falls on Chis himself was undoubtedly a disciple of the wider vision. These early Eastern Christians, dreaming of things to come, refused, in the name of the soul within them, to estimate life with all its wealth and happiness in terms of the visible and temporal. They convinced themselves of the good purpose in what appeared sheer cruelty, and were enabled to endure any amount of pain they were willing to spend and be spent for Christ. They were in the war, but carried a charm about them. The comfort was not the kind yielded by padding. It flowed from the action of the loftiest spiritual energy. Surely in such a world theirs is a secret worth knowing. In a reorganization of the Persian church during the reign of Yazdegerd I, probably getting persecuted there in that period. So they're getting persecuted by lots of different nations. In the 17th century, the oldest Chinese inscription was found in Eastern Asia, and so far is the only known vestige in China itself of a once prosperous mission. The 67 Nestorian missionaries whose names and labours are recorded on this tablet must have been residents in some portion of China at a much earlier date than that named upon the tablet, for the eggs of the silkworm were brought from China to Constantinople in 551 AD by Nestorian monks. The tablet was erected in the second year of Qian Chung of the Tang dynasty, 781 AD, on the 7th day of the first month, being Sunday, in the time of the Nestorian patriarch Ysho. So their seventh day happened to be on a Sunday, so maybe they were using the Creator's calendar or their Hebrew calendar, which makes the Hebrew day very different from the day that we know. It has its 12-hour daylight and 12-hour night, right? But yeah, it was very different from our day as we know it. They had a month of 29 days, one extra if they could see the crescent moon. The first was a new moon day, not a Sabbath. Work 6 days according to this old Hebrew calendar, etc., the old calendar. So the Sabbath would have fell on the 15th, 22nd, 29th, or this, sixth, the new moon day. You got to work 6 days, so it would be the 7th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th, and then the extra day, the 30th day, because the months only consisted of 29 days. If they couldn't see the crescent moon that night in the night sky. So yeah, their Sabbaths weren't fixed. Okay? They didn't use a Gregorian calendar and come to say all the Sabbaths were on Saturday. Okay? It was supposedly admittedly changed by the Jews to that Saturday. Some say the Roman Catholic Church changed it, and they also changed the Lord's Day, which is actually the Sabbath. They changed it to Sunday, because they were using the solar cycle, like the solar lunar, and supposedly they were a pagan mix, worshipping Mithra and the sun concept, etc. S-U-N, not S-O-N, and so forth. It appears from unquestionable documents still existing that there were numerous societies in all parts of Persia, India, Armenia, and Arabia, Syria, and other countries under the jurisdiction of the Patriarch of Seleucia. Hermizd IV, the successor of Anusharwan, 583 to 591, was a pro-Christian ruler. It is said that the Magi tried to arouse him to persecute the Christians on the ground that they were a danger to his throne. "My throne stands on 4 feet, not on 2, said the king, on Jews and Christians as well as on Zoroastrians," and so the matter dropped. He was the king, so what he said went.